Why USA won. A maid's toddler couldn't stop crying, then a billionaire stepped in. Have you ever watched a grown man scream at a crying baby? I have. And what happened after that night changed everything I believed about money, pride, and what it really means to win. This story is true to life, even if some names have been changed to protect the people in it. Stay with me until the end, because the ending will surprise you. It surprised everyone who was in that house that night. Her name was Anna. She was 34 years old, and she had been working as a housekeeper for one of the richest men in Texas for almost 3 years. Her son, Theo, was 2 years old. He had big brown eyes and a laugh that could fill an entire room. Anna came from a small country called Caldera, a place most Americans could not even find on a map. She left everything behind, her mother, her sisters, the little house where she grew up, because back home, there was no work, no future, and no hope for a child like Theo. The man she worked for was named Richard Hale. Richard was a billionaire. He owned hotels, a private jet, 3 houses, and a football team he had bought just 2 years earlier because, in his words, winning feels good and I like to win. Richard was 60 years old, silver-haired, always in a perfectly pressed suit and always in control. People who worked for him said his eyes were cold, even when he smiled. He had built his empire from nothing, or so he told every reporter who asked. And now, at the top of that empire, he expected the whole world to bow to him, including a 2-year-old boy. Now let me take you back to that night. It was the night of the World Cup final. The United States was playing against Caldera, yes, Anna's home country, for the championship of the world. Nobody expected this matchup. Caldera was a tiny nation, but their team had fought their way through the tournament like warriors, and somehow, against every prediction, they had made it to the final. Richard Hale decided to throw a party, not just any party, the party of the year. He invited business partners, senators, celebrities, even a former president. Champagne was flowing before the match even started. A massive screen, bigger than most movie theaters, was set up in his backyard, next to the pool that overlooked the hills. And in the kitchen, working quietly, was Anna. She had been asked to work a double shift that night, serving drinks and food to over 200 guests. She had nowhere else to put Theo, so she brought him with her, like she sometimes had to. She placed him in a small playpen near the side door, close enough that she could check on him between trips, but far enough that the guests would not be bothered by a toddler. If you're already feeling something in your chest right now, that little twist of worry, hold on to it, because it's about to get so much worse before it gets better. And if stories like this, stories about real people, real struggle, and real justice, mean something to you, then do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. Do it for Anna. Do it for every mother out there who has ever had to bring her child to work because she had no other choice. The game began. Richard sat in the front row of lounge chairs, a cigar in one hand, a glass of scotch in the other. Every time the United States had the ball near the goal, the whole backyard would rise to their feet. Every time Caldera pushed forward, Richard would groan and shout at the screen like the players could hear him from 3,000 miles away. In the kitchen, Anna kept glancing toward the small window that faced the yard. She could hear the crowd, but she could not see the score. She did not need to. She could tell from the sound of the guests whether her country was winning or losing. For most of the match, it was close. Caldera scored first in the 11th minute, and for a moment the whole backyard went silent. Anna, standing at the counter, allowed herself one small smile. Just one. She wiped it away quickly and kept working, because a smile like that in a house like this on a night like this could get her in trouble. The United States tied it in the second half. Then, in the final minutes of the game, with the score even and the whole world holding its breath, the United States scored again. The winning goal. The backyard exploded. Grown men screamed and hugged strangers. Champagne bottles popped into the night sky. Richard Hale stood up so fast his chair fell backward, and he raised both arms like a man who had just won a war, not a football game. And in that moment, from the little playpen by the side door, Theo began to cry. It started small, the kind of cry a toddler makes when a loud noise scares him, but it did not stop. It grew louder and louder, a high, panicked wail that cut straight through the noise of the celebration. Some of the guests near the door turned and looked. A few laughed. One woman said, loud enough for others to hear, "Whose kid is that? Somebody should get that thing out of here." That thing, a 2-year-old boy, crying because 200 strangers had just screamed loud enough to shake the walls. And nobody thought to comfort him except his mother, who was too busy carrying a tray of drinks to reach him in time. Anna rushed over as fast as she could, setting the tray down so quickly 2 glasses tipped over. She scooped Theo into her arms, whispering to him softly in the language of Caldera, trying to calm him down. But the damage was already done. Richard Hale had heard the crying. And worse, he had heard what the boy was crying about, because in his panic, little Theo, only knowing the words his mother had taught him, cried out something in Caldera that one of the guests, a man who had done business overseas for years, understood and repeated out loud with a laugh. He said his team should have won. Can you believe that? The backyard laughed, all except one man. Richard Hale's face changed in an instant. The pride of victory twisted into something darker, something uglier. He walked straight toward Anna, his shoes crunching against the stone path, his glass still in his hand. "Is that true?" he said, his voice low and sharp. "Your kid is crying because my country beat yours." Anna lowered her eyes. "He's just a baby, Mr. Hale. He doesn't understand." "He doesn't understand." Richard's voice rose, and now every guest near the pool had turned to watch. "You people come to my country, you work in my house, you eat my food, and your kid stands here crying because America won, in my own backyard." I want you to imagine this for a second. A powerful man, 60 years old, red in the face, shouting at a woman holding a frightened toddler in front of 200 people on what should have been the happiest night of his life. This is the part of the story that made me angry the first time I heard it. And if it's making your chest tighten too, stay with me, because what happens next is why we're telling this story at all. If you believe every mother deserves to be treated with respect, no matter where she comes from, tap that like button right now. Let's show the world how many people out there still believe in basic human decency. Anna tried to apologize. She tried to explain that Theo was frightened, that he did not understand politics or pride or nationality, that he was only a baby reacting to a loud, scary noise. But Richard was not listening anymore. He had an audience now, and pride, when wounded in front of an audience, becomes something dangerous. "You know what?" Richard said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't need people in my house who root against America. I don't care if you're the Maid or the Queen of England. Get your things. You're done here." There was a hush across the backyard. Even the guests who had been laughing moments before now looked uncomfortable. Anna stood frozen, Theo still whimpering against her shoulder, tears streaking down her own face now too. "Please, Mr. Hale," she whispered. "I need this job, my son." "Should have thought about that before you raised him to hate this country," Richard snapped. Now here's something you need to understand about Anna. She had survived things most of the people in that backyard could never imagine. She had crossed a border with nothing but a backpack and a baby. She had slept in shelters. She had worked 3 jobs at once just to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. She was not a weak woman. But in that moment, standing in front of the man who controlled her paycheck, her visa sponsorship, and her entire future in this country, she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She turned to walk away, holding her son close, when a voice cut through the silence. "Dad, stop." Every head turned. Standing near the pool was Richard's own daughter, Grace. She was 26 years old, home for the summer from her job at a nonprofit in Chicago, a place her father never fully understood or approved of. She had watched the entire thing unfold from just a few feet away, and something inside her had finally snapped. "Grace, stay out of this," Richard warned. "No," Grace said, walking closer, her voice shaking but firm. "You're screaming at a baby, Dad, a baby. Do you hear yourself right now?" This is the moment the story turns. And if you've ever watched someone you love do something you couldn't believe, something that made you question everything you thought you knew about them, then you already understand why this next part matters so much. But before I tell you what Grace said next, and what it uncovered about Richard's own past, I need you to comment below with one word: family. Because this story is about to show you that family, real family, sometimes means standing up to the people who raised you. Grace stood between her father and Anna, her arms crossed. "Do you even remember where Grandma Rose came from?" she asked him. Richard's face went pale. For a moment, the anger drained out of him, replaced by something else, something that looked almost like shame. You see, what none of the guests knew, what most of Richard's business partners had never heard, was that Richard Hale's own grandmother had come to America from a small village overseas with almost nothing, just like Anna. She had worked as a domestic housekeeper for a wealthy family in New York for nearly 20 years, scrubbing floors and raising other people's children while her own son, Richard's father, grew up in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. Richard's father had worked his way up through sheer stubborn will, and Richard himself had built the family fortune on top of that foundation. But somewhere along the way, in the mansions and the private jets and the champagne, Richard had forgotten where it all started. Grace hadn't forgotten. She had grown up hearing her grandmother's stories, and she had never let go of them. "You're standing here," Grace said, her voice cracking, "screaming at a woman for raising her son the same way your own grandmother raised your father. The only difference is your grandmother wasn't lucky enough to have someone stand up for her." The backyard was completely silent now. Even the pool seemed to have stopped moving. Anna stood frozen, still holding Theo, watching this unfold, not knowing what would happen next. Richard looked at his daughter. He looked at Anna. He looked down at the little boy in her arms, still hiccuping from the tears, his small hand gripping his mother's shirt like it was the only solid thing left in the world. And then something happened that nobody expected. Richard Hale set down his glass of scotch on the nearest table. He walked toward Anna, slowly this time, and he knelt down, right there on the stone patio in his expensive suit, so that he was at eye level with Theo. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the boy, and something in his own eyes seemed to soften, like a wall inside him was cracking open after 60 years. "I'm sorry," Richard said quietly, so quietly that only Anna, Grace, and a few nearby guests could hear it. "I'm sorry, little man, it's just a game." Theo, sensing the change in the man's voice, stopped crying and looked at him with wide, curious eyes. It was such a small moment, but in that backyard full of powerful, wealthy people, it felt enormous. Richard stood back up and turned to Anna. "You still have a job here," he said. "If you want it, I was wrong." I know what some of you might be thinking right now. Is that enough? A man screams, humiliates a mother and her child in front of 200 people, and then says sorry and it's supposed to be fixed. I understand that feeling completely, and I promise you this story does not end there. Because saying sorry is easy. What Richard did in the weeks that followed is what truly matters, and it's the part of this story that nobody expected, not even Anna herself. The party ended quietly after that. Guests left early, uncomfortable, whispering to each other in the driveway. By the next morning, word had already started to spread. Someone had filmed part of the argument on their phone, and within 2 days it was everywhere online. Richard Hale, billionaire football team owner, screaming at a maid and her toddler because their home country lost a game. The internet, as it always does, reacted fast and hard. News outlets picked up the story. Business partners called, worried about their public image. A major sponsor of Richard's football team threatened to pull out entirely. For the first time in decades, Richard Hale was not in control of the narrative. He was not the man dictating terms in a boardroom. He was just a man who had been caught on camera at his very worst. He could have hired lawyers. He could have released a cold, careful statement written by his PR team, denying wrongdoing, spinning the story, making it disappear the way powerful men often make their mistakes disappear. That is what everyone expected him to do. Instead, Richard did something nobody saw coming. He asked Anna if he could meet with her, not as her employer, but as a man who owed her an apology that went far beyond a few quiet words on a patio. Anna was nervous. She had heard stories about what happens to people who embarrass powerful men, even accidentally. But something in Richard's voice on the phone was different. It wasn't the voice of a man protecting his image. It was the voice of a man who could not stop thinking about his own grandmother, about the boy crying in his backyard, about 60 years of forgetting where he came from. They met in his office, not the backyard, not in front of an audience. Just the two of them and Grace sitting quietly in the corner. Richard told Anna about his grandmother, Rose, for the first time in years. He told her how Rose had worked for a family who treated her like furniture, how she had cried herself to sleep some nights from exhaustion and loneliness, how she had saved every extra penny so that Richard's father could go to school and have a life she never had. He told Anna that somewhere between his grandmother's small apartment and his own mansion, he had built walls around himself, walls made of money and pride, and he had forgotten what it felt like to be the person on the outside looking in. "I built my whole life pretending my family started with me," Richard said. "But it didn't. It started with a woman just like you." This is the part of the story that gets me every time I tell it. Because real change, the kind that actually means something, rarely comes from a perfect person doing everything right. It comes from a flawed person finally seeing the truth about themselves and choosing, even late, even imperfectly, to do better. If this story is stirring something in you right now, some memory of your own mother, your own grandmother, someone in your family who sacrificed everything so you could have an easier life, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Somewhere out there is a person who needs to be reminded that it is never too late to say sorry and mean it. Richard didn't just apologize with words. In the weeks that followed, he did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He set up a college fund for Theo, fully paid from kindergarten all the way through university. He raised Anna's salary and gave her proper paid time off, something she had never had in 3 years of working for him. He also did something even bigger. He reached out to Caldeura's small football federation, a poor, underfunded program that could barely afford proper equipment for its young players, and he donated enough money to build a new training center for youth players back in Anna's home country, the very country his own guests had mocked in his backyard that night. When reporters asked him why, Richard said something that ended up on the front page of several newspapers. He said, "I spent my whole life thinking winning meant being better than everyone else. I was wrong. Winning means lifting people up, not knocking them down." Anna still works for Richard today, but something between them changed after that night. He no longer sees her as invisible help moving quietly through his house. He sees her as a mother who crossed an ocean for her son, the same way his own grandmother once did. And Theo, now a little older, has a framed photo in his bedroom of himself, at 2 years old, on Richard Hale's lap, both of them laughing, taken just a few months after that terrible, unforgettable night. So here is the real answer to the question in the title of this video. Why did the USA win that night? Not on the football field. The football field was decided fair and square, and there is no shame in that at all. I'm asking why America truly won in the way that matters most. America won because a young woman named Grace had the courage to stand up to her own father in front of 200 people. America won because a billionaire, faced with his own ugliness on full display, chose humility over pride. And America won because somewhere in Texas, a little boy who once cried in fear now laughs freely, growing up in a home where he is loved, protected, and never made to feel small again. If this story touched your heart today, if it reminded you that kindness is always stronger than power, and humility is always stronger than pride, I want you to do one last thing before you go. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one again. These are the stories that remind us who we really are, underneath all the noise of winning and losing. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.